Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Alana Rabinovich, and I'm thrilled to introduce tonight's power panel, Less is More, the Art of the Short Story. Tonight's event features 6 incredibly accomplished, talented, and award-winning short fiction writers. Sharon Bala, whose best-selling debut novel, The Boat People, won the 2020 Newfoundland and Labrador Book Award and the 2019 Harper Lee Prize for Legal Fiction, was shortlisted for several awards and is in translation in 4 languages. David Bezmozgis, a writer and filmmaker, 3 times nominated for the Scotiabank Giller Prize. He is the author of 4 books, including Natasha and Other Stories and Immigrant City Stories. Alexander MacLeod, whose first collection, Light Lifting, was a national bestseller, won an Atlantic Book Award, and was a finalist for the Scotiabank Giller Prize, the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award, the Thomas Head Riddell Fiction Award, and a Commonwealth Book Prize. Alex will be moderating tonight's panel. Tea Mutonji. Tea's first collection of short stories, Shut Up, You're Pretty, was shortlisted for the Atwood Gibson Writers Trust Fiction Prize and won the Edmund White Award and the Trillium Book Award. Daniel Sarah Karasik, the author of 6 books, including his new poetry collection, Plentitude, and the short story collection, Faithful and Other Stories. Finally, Richard Van Camp, a Clicho Dene from Fort Smith, Northwest Territories. He is a renowned storyteller and best-selling author of 27 books these past 27 years. To all our viewers tonight, please take advantage of the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Alex will take as many questions as he can as possible around 7:45. So without further delay, here's Alexander MacLeod and the rest of the panel.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from Mi'kma'ki from Halifax. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. It's been exciting just pulling this celebration together. We are here. Richard has been excited the whole last 3 days, saying, here we are in the Church of the Short Story, a place where people who care about this art form can dive in. We can talk about it amongst ourselves in a kind of safe space where the thing that is sometimes seen as the kind of second-class citizen or the little brother of the novel, maybe not the dominant player, literally gets a chance to have a little light shone upon it. So I'm so grateful that I get to share this time with you. So grateful to be here with these practitioners. So my first question is probably the obvious question, and I'll just start there and we'll go around. Many people in commercial publishing will tell you that the novel is really the only game in town, yet all of us have still chosen to work in this genre of short fiction. Rather than focusing on what's deficient or lacking in short fiction, maybe it's just sales, do you think our collective might be able to flip the switch and talk a bit about the special aesthetic possibilities, additive potential that we see in short fiction that aren't there in the novel? So I'd like to go around and tell me what's great about writing a short story. What can you pull off in a short story that you might not be able to pull off in long form fiction? What eager person would like to go first? Okay, David, it's you. You moved your head. That's enough.
I'm happy to talk about it.
That's enough. That's enough to.
That's fine. That's okay. I mean, I think there are a number of things. Like, I think formally, what is a short story is really kind of a plastic thing. There are list stories. There are all sorts of things that function as a short story. Some of my favorite, short stories are really unusual. Grace Paley has a story called Wants, which is incredibly short. And, some short stories are conversations. I mean, so I love how plastic the form is. I'm really interested in form. And I think every time I set out to tell a story, the how is really part of what excites me. I also think that writers have, you're a runner, Alex, as I know. And I think runners have sort of their distances. You know, some people are just naturally marathoners, and some people are naturally like they run the mile. And I think that there's something to it. I love compression. I'm constantly looking to make things as compressed and concise as possible. I get a lot of pleasure out of that, and get a lot of pleasure from finding people who are good at it, people who write like epigrammatically. So I think, yeah, I think the short story is, for that reason, I find really satisfying.
Plasticity is a great term. Anyone else want to build off of that?
The one thing that the short story does and can do really well is sort of force you as the reader to linger in a place of discomfort and in a place of uncertainty. You know, you'll read a short story, and because of the compression that David was talking about, there's a question will be raised and not answered. I think short stories ask more questions than they answer, and there's a lot of tolerance within that form for that kind of forcing the reader to stay there, that sort of feeling of the short story being a trust exercise between, as the writer, you have to trust your reader, you have to trust in the intelligence of your reader, and not, there's no room to spoon feed anything. And I think in the novel, there's just less, the novel is less tolerant of that. You can do it, and there are certainly novels that are very experimental in the way that short stories can be experimental, but somehow there's less, there are fewer of those.
I think that's a great point, that the story kind of asks something of the reader right from the beginning that maybe some readers of novels might not want. I might not want to be giving you that much just right now, but the story, I think the story kind of asks for that. What do you think, Taya?
Yeah, I kind of agree with both those points. For me, a novel is very much a conversation that's happening only within the world of the novel, whereas a short story, I always feel like the author is inviting me to participate in a way that I don't necessarily feel as confident with a novel. But growing up, I actually thought that novel writing was the easy thing to do, that to me, it was like a novel just has a lot of words, whereas a short story, it's telling a full story with like significantly less amount of space and time, and that to me was the challenge. That was the real exercise. I don't feel exactly the same now, but it's interesting how that perspective has shaped the way I approach both forms.
Daniel, Sarah?
Yeah, I also admire compression and aspire to compression, and I'm drawn often to the epigrammatic to the point of the cryptic. Sometimes I think, you know, like Lydia Davis is somebody who's like, I was thinking about like who are my sort of like lasting longtime faves among short story writers, and like Lydia Davis is one of them, or like, you know, Kafka, you know, it's an early influence or something. But I was gonna say, like, my own experience was that I kept compressing my way out of having written novels. Like, I kept compressing my way from a novel draft into a short story that I cut so much, you know, because I would like have a, you know, 70,000 word novel draft that I would cut down to like 15,000 words, or, you know, the same proportions for something smaller, because I was so kind of like compulsively, I don't know if it's precision seeking or just like, I don't know, like compression seeking. And the other thing I was going to say is that I feel like I've had for a long time this sort of intuition that the short story form, that I will find wisdom, like as a reader, even like as a teenager or whatever, like I will find wisdom there. Like it is like a form of wisdom literature that is not, that is somehow like categorically distinct from the sort of escapist pleasure of the novel, let's say, or like other forms. And I don't entirely know where I got that intuition from, because it was like, I guess there's this sort of, you know, you could trace a certain lineage of that idea from like Joyce or whatever, this is the epiphanic like short story. But I think I had that intuition before I knew who Joyce was. So I don't know if it's just like, you know, like from like Hebrew school or something, just like the sort of like the kinds of wisdom literatures you're exposed to in religious, you know, religious traditions or something, that often have like compressed, elliptical, fabulistic, you know, mythic kinds of qualities. But yeah, I definitely was like a teenager kind of looking like for the meaning of life in short stories and not in other forms. And I don't know entirely why that was, but it definitely animated my like interest in writing them.
Richard?
When I think about my reading life, I am far more haunted by short stories than I am novels. And I read everything. I'll read, you know, I read just like you all, many books, all genres, all year. But when I think about, my life looking back, it was really the short story, from whether it was Stephen Jesse Bernstein, Letting the Horses Go, or his beautiful short memoir, short story, Face. When I think about Miranda July, No One Belongs, what is it? It's called
No one belongs here more than you.
No One Belongs Here More Than You. I really appreciate how a short story as a reader is like a knife stabbed through the ribs. You're actually holding like a perfect Saturday night. Short stories are these perfect swirling universes that linger with you long after. And I really appreciate, Sharon, what you said, that they ask far more questions that you'll ever find answers to. It just, they're random, they're instant, and it's either a love language or it isn't with a certain author or a certain short story. But I love what they do. I love that, what I've learned in 27 books in 27 years is the story is the boss. And yes, there is a lot of pressure for the almighty novel, but if it wants to be, if it has to be, if it breathes to be a short story, as a disciple to the craft of writing, we have to respect that. And I love how it haunts us. And in fact, when I look at we were doing a little list of our favorite short story collections and short stories that have lingered with us. It hit me that I have lent out tons of novels that have never come back, but I will never lend you a short story collection because these are mine. These are from my heart and my soul and my being. I love short stories. I love them. I love collections. And I'm just grateful to be here tonight. I want to listen.
So something that I find interesting about this group, especially, and this kind of builds off what you've said about plasticity and about the kind of fiction that you appreciate, stuff that demands something from you, is I don't mean to denigrate anything else, but I think the short story is a work of art in that it's artificiality. Its artificiality, as Dave was pointing out, is almost always present to us. Like we don't think of it as even a naturalistic short story. We see it as a series of choices. So I don't know if the rest of the audience knows, but this group writes in all the different genres. I was thinking we have everything from poets to the oral tradition to screenwriters to dramatists to screenwriters, comic arts people. Like, you have all told stories in all kinds of different modes. And I was very interested to see the poetic elements coming out in so many of your answers. So I was wondering if you could help me out here and talk a little bit about where your short fiction work might be located, or how do you think about it compared to all the other kinds of writing that you do? When do you know that this is a short story and not a poem, or this is a short story and not a screen? What sort of choices are at work in something like that?
I think that I'm very concerned with accessibility in my writing, especially because I am trilingual. So I've always struggled with English up until maybe my early 20s. So writing short story for me, I'm trying to write it in the way that I speak and the way that I sound, especially because I stumble and I don't actually know many words. I'll repeat myself quite a bit. So the poetic element in my short story comes also because of the fact that I have too many languages in my head and I personally get confused. So I've sort of adapted my writing practice to be convenient for just the way I also express myself in every other practices. So I kind of always know whether I'm writing a poem or a short story based on who I'm trying to reach and what I'm trying to say. A lot of my poetry is a little bit more confessional. It's very straightforward. So there's nothing, I don't want to say interesting, but there's less of a quest in my poetry that there is in my short story. So accessibility for me, and just music. I like what I hear when certain words are being said, certain dialogues are being delivered. So those are really important keys for me.
I think the sonic quality is absolutely key in short fiction. But anybody else?
I mean, I do screenwriting, I guess, and I've written novels. I mean, screenwriting, I find like nothing is easy, but I find it to be the easiest form because it's mostly dialogue and a type of description that doesn't demand very much of you. Whereas the hardest thing I find is, into like describing the world figuratively, to take something that is the abstract and make it concrete, which is where prose and poetry come into it. And that's, I don't really make a distinction between, in the way that I write, between like a novel and a short story, because the approach is the same. But I think, what appeals to me about prose writing, and a lot of it does become short fiction, is that sense of like how I love language, and I think most of the time I spend looking for the right word. And maybe it is because I wasn't born speaking English first, I don't really know. But the attention to language, finding the right word, the dynamics within a line, the dynamics within a paragraph, I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And when I get it right, when I feel like I get it right, it's tremendously satisfying. And, similarly, I said it the first time, when I read people who can really do it, who change registers, and with language and tone, I just think it's incredibly like satisfying. And, if you talk about it as a work of art, I mean, I think, my definition of a work of art in any art form is something you can come back to over and over again, and get basically the same satisfaction, if not more, because there's a mystery to it. There's something enigmatic, like it's right, it's all there in front of you. It's just words, right? But you're like, how did this person do that? How do they do it? And I think as with Richard, I think about stories more often than any other form, probably some poems too, as doing that, and something you just carry around with you. And Daniel, I think you said that too, like the wisdom of it. You just carry around with that. Yeah.
It's funny, David, that you said that you find screenwriting is easy because it's just dialogue. I'm currently trying to turn 3 linked short stories into a script for theater, and I'm finding it a real challenge to have all of my tools taken away except for direct dialogue. That's all I have left. And it's, I'm used to working with all of narration and exposition and scene setting and all that kind of stuff. I find short stories have always been for me a little place to experiment. And that's what I love as a writer with short stories, is that I can try something. And it's kind of low stakes because I always think, this is what I tell myself, it's just a short story. If it doesn't work out, it's fine. But then inevitably I end up spending years working on just one short story.
I think I've also been pretty preoccupied with the question of audience that's come up with the short story. And I sort of like, I don't know, I'm a bit of a weird guest on this panel because I've sort of stopped writing short stories. Like I may continue, I may start again, as I've done over the years a few times, but I published a book of short stories in 2017 that represented a bunch of work from when I was like mainly in my late teens, early 20s. I'd sort of written the early drafts of it. And then I haven't really written short stories since. I've written a lot of other stuff that's like a short story adjacent. And I've tried to figure out why. And I think it has to do with like, I've had the sense that like the short story form, often the audience for it was like maybe this is wrong, it was like short story lovers or like literature lovers, it's like the audience for it feels often conceived very much as like people who love books, like people, it's like, it's not, just for other writers, but it's definitely like, I don't know, there's something like that seem to me like somewhat sort of like inward facing, about its conceptions of audience, whether that's like because it's thought of as part of a national literature, and so it's like doing that or something. I don't know. I'm not being totally clear about this, but I think I became really interested in writing poetry, political journalism, all that kind of stuff for people who were sort of preoccupied with particular sort of political problems, people like particular social problems, and that like the people I want to reach sort of present tense, would be people who were sort of engaged in struggle or in these sorts of problems in a sort of, in solidarity with each other in some way. And so like for I guess a variety of reasons, I was like, oh, like a poem, that can reach like poems can reach people who don't necessarily think of themselves as like poetry lovers in some like, sort of predetermined way. I find, it's like, it's fast. You can read it, like on Instagram or whatever, it's like, there's something about just the ways that different forms or different kinds of media are consumed that seems to, make certain forms more compatible with certain projects. There's a line in Audre Lorde's Sister Outsider. She's like, the poem is really, like the form that you can kind of just like, you can read it in between shifts, if you're like working, just like on the subway or whatever. And I think I was really compelled by that sort of impulse, and have had trouble figuring out like how does the short story work in those sorts of ways. And I mean, I think there are like lots of good answers to that question, but I think like I just became like, I found it hard to answer for myself. Yeah, it's a bit of a messy answer.
No, Richard, help me out.
Hey, no, I just want to say, when you think about, remember that saying, I wrote a novel because I didn't have time to write a short story. Did you ever hear that one before? I think about Bill Kinsella's, the late Bill Kinsella's short story Kmart. And, I find myself walking with those characters and wondering, it's the world's shortest little short story. It could have been a novel, but Bill, maybe it took all the writing and all the books and everything that he'd ever done to perfect that one short story. And I find that, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I will say that I can't think of a more immediate vehicle for emotion for me personally than the short story. I burst into tears far more often with a short story than I do a novel or a graphic novel or a children's book. And there's that word compression. It's just this, somebody's found this recipe of words and braided it with alchemy and craft and showing up every single day. And it's just this spring-loaded little animal in a book that can launch itself into your face, into your soul forever. And I crave it. And that's what excites me about literary journals and fearless publishers that really stand behind their authors and say, it's not a novel, we don't care. This is great literature. And there's 24 little animals right here just waiting for you to open the page and get pounced upon and pounced into forever. I love that. And I think, that's why I always say to emerging writers, they say, if you want to be a better writer, you have to become a better reader, and you've got to read the literary journals, because what's in the, Prairie Fire and fill in the blank for all the other great literary journals across this great country of ours, that to me is often far more exciting than what's on the bestseller list, because it's almost like people, the new writers or the writers that are publishing in smaller journals, they don't actually know what they're doing, and there's something magical to that. They're not worried about the marketing. They're just creating something that's mad and random and wild and beautiful and startling. And I love that. I crave that. It's so inspiring to me. That just gets me going in my own craft to go, I want to do that too. I want to write something that random, that wild, that unforgettable, that haunting. And the novel's just too long to do that. Let's just spring load something and betray everybody in the process and have a lot of fun doing that. And that's the beauty of the short story.
Well, I'm saving that for my last question, as you know. So I am really interested in the way that the short story writers are our readers, in the way that Daniel Sarah is saying that. But I think that perhaps there's something in the air even right now, that perhaps some of that immediacy that we see in poetic call to arms, or in poetic the immediacy of poetic form is coming through in short stories as well. I think we are seeing a lot of the formal innovation that David was talking about, changing how we think about the form. So I'm going to try give you an option here. It's about, we can either talk, each person can talk about how characters work in short stories, because I think they work differently. I think the concept of a character is different in a short story than it is in a novel. What the character is going to do, how much time you have with the character, what sort of revelation the character is going to have. And then I have one that people are prepared for, which is about openings. So sometimes we see characters in opening scenes. I'm interested in how you open your stories and how you close them. So each person can tell me a little bit about how openings and closings work in short fiction, because I think it's dramatically different. I think it might be closer to a poem, openings and closings, in short stories. So tell me a little bit about your openings or your closings, or if you prefer, how you think about character, how these actual constituent components, like narrative elements, how they work in your short fiction. What do you think about openings and closings and or characters? Sharon, I think you got something for me, do you? You have
Yeah,
something.
I do.
I think I can see.
Yeah. So the poet, novelist Anne Simpson was here in St. John's when I was first starting to write, and she taught a workshop on openings, and she taught me something that I've never been able to stop doing, which is that I should distrust my openings, and I often do. And particularly in short stories, I have been known to write like 2,000 words and then cut it out. Here's the real beginning. And then same thing for the end, which I think is like a Hemingway thing. I also distrust the endings. What I'm finding as a reader of other people's short stories is I notice often that there's a seed that's planted in the beginning that comes to fruition at the end. And sometimes you don't notice it until the end if you go back and read the beginning. And that's the beauty of a short story, is that you can do that. You can read the short story several times, and which, we're not really going to make that kind of investment unless we're writers and we're obsessed with a novel. So for me, I don't think I really ever thought about that consciously when I was writing short stories, that idea of returning to the end. But the other thing I love about short stories is you can be completely audacious in what you do in a way that you can't. Somehow, I at least am more reticent in a novel. You can take a scene, you can write the story and have it in order, and then take a scene from the middle and put it at the end, and it changes the whole story. It changes your understanding of what was really happening. Or you can do this thing that Tessa Hadley does in the story The Abduction, where she flashes forward, a couple of decades into the future. And suddenly you get something that it seems like it's unconnected to the action of the story. But I love that about short stories, that you can really play with the reader's emotions a little bit and be really manipulative. I mean, you can in a novel too, but somehow it's more on the surface.
Okay, beginnings and endings. I've a number of times have had the last line in my head and have written towards it. In my first collection, there are a few. There's one that there's a story that ends the first collection, Natasha, called Minion. And
Yeah, that's a great story. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
And the last line is, a man says to another man about a minion is you need 10 men to perform a Jewish service, and it's like. And the story itself deals with an older couple that's suspected to be gay in this community, but like his line is like, homosexuals, murderers, liars, and thieves, I take them all. Without them, we'd never have a minion. And I was always writing to that, and there are a number of times where I've had like a line of dialogue, and I also think there, when I look at my work and maybe short stories in general, it feels like there's like. You guys can tell me if you think this is right or not, but it's like there are two different ways to end. You can end on dialogue, which happens sometimes in stories. I'm talking about endings more than openings right now. Or you can end on this sort of Chekhovian thing, which really, I think, is the beginning of the modern short story, where it's like this sort of existential kind of drift that happens past the period. Like, the story is going to continue. What you're getting, I think, also in a story, people have asked, it's an episode in someone's life. It's not the entire life, right? And maybe that's what people find unsatisfying or frustrating about stories, where it's like, but then what happens? Well, it's like, I don't know, the rest of this person's life happens, but here's just an episode that we've probably experienced in some form or another, and this is what it's about, So I think, it's that finding a way to reach the end of that episodic experience of a life. Without being didactic about it. Again, that's also a Chekhovian thing. I think there are a lot of didactic stories before that. that is supposed to teach you something, but not didactic. It continues on beyond. It could end on, you know, an image. When it's badly done, it's like, you know, and then the bird flew past the cloud. Like, what the fuck? That's it? The bird in the cloud. But done well, it's like, yeah, it's really powerful.
I think I write towards a sentence that comes to me as well. With Show Up You're Pretty, I had this line that was, I need a cigarette or else I'll die. And that line launched my entire book. And I just, based on how dramatic it sounds, I kind of knew the age of this character immediately after. I had this line in my head that just kept playing. And I wrote the story Tits for Cigs with this line in mind. And initially I thought it would be in the opening or the ending line. It ended up being in the middle somewhere. And so I had to create a scenario where a character would say this particular line and then give it a finale that felt satisfying to this line. And I became completely dedicated to just this piece of dialogue. And I've noticed that I've actually done that for most of my work in fiction. I mean, the big mistake is that I also made that same approach in novel writing, which it's longer. It takes a lot more work that way. But with short stories, it's I go on walks and I think of a sound or a line or a conversation that these two people are having, and then I create a world based on that. So I feel like I enter every practice not really with the opening in mind, but mostly with the middle, or what I call the stomach of, like, the warm part of my story is sort of how I then decide what goes and what doesn't. A lot of cutting does happen for me as well. For the most part, the ending of most of my short stories ends up being the entire story. So it's usually 3,000 words gone and I have 1,000 left in microfiction. So that's been my practice so far.
I like
Yeah.
that, the stomach of the story.
Pardon?
I like that, the stomach of the story.
Yeah.
I relate to that a lot as well. I feel like I end up, yeah, the beginning is buried and the ending is buried somewhere, and I have to kind of dig it out over years. Maybe I was going to answer the character question. Perhaps I think my relationship to that question has become, like, increasingly, I think, like, autistic as I've gotten older, where I'm like, why do we need to, like, what is it, like, what is a character, why characters, like, what is that doing, like why, like, if I have like a question, like if I want to know something, right, like, or something is beautiful to me and I'm pursuing that beauty, like, why do I need to, like, represent that in the form of character? What is that doing? And of course there's, like, good, like, obvious answers to that, like, it's enjoyable when you follow characters and you, like, you know, get involved in their lives, right? But I think so I'm sort of contradicting myself. I am actually working on, like, short somethings. I don't know if there's stories, again, for the first time in ages, that I'm thinking of as, like, literary nonfiction, but they're, you know, sort of like episodic, fragmentary prose somethings that are sort of linked together. And there are no characters, they're just sentences. And I'm like, you know, I guess I'm kind of asking myself a lot, like, what, maybe I need to tell a story. Like maybe this is not enough. Like, this is just, like, me sort of, like, diarying, that's a dangerous sounding verb, like, you know, like, it sounds like I'm, like, doing a diary, you know, which is, like, fine if that's, like, but maybe, you know, I feel this pressure to, like, sort of, you know, move the work into some sort of, like, packaged, you know, narrative-y, like, thing. But then I keep kind of asking myself, like, but why? Like, why though? Why do I have to do that? Like, can I not just, like, make the sentences, and, like, if the sentences are, like, you know, like, leading me somewhere interesting and they're, like, beautiful on their own terms, and I can make them so, if I, you know, if I can achieve that, you know, like, then why does it need, you know, the extra sort of, I don't know, like those other sort of, like, formal conventions. So maybe it's just, like, a, you know, kind of long way of saying, yeah, that, like, the short story is, like, super hybrid and you can kind of do whatever you want. But yeah, I think I'm interested in, like how does the short story, like, but the essay as a form, you know, we talk about other literary forms, but, you know, what is the place of the sort of, like, idea driven, you know, sort of attempts, right? Like, how does that relate to the story, the short story? Because I also can find, you know, my favorite short stories are, you know, some of them are so moving, but I, you know, I sort of half joke that I've become literally more autistic about it, in that, like, I'm also sort of like, well, like, do I want an emotional experience from a short story? Or maybe I don't. Maybe that's, like, an experience that I want from, like, certain like moments in my life, like with people in relationship, with people in friendship and whatever. But from literature, maybe I want understanding. Maybe that's like not sort of, maybe I'm not moved by that in the same way, but maybe I'm, enriched by that in some way. And it's not just like, pedagogy. I'm not just like, learning in some sort of banal kind of didactic, whatever way, but yeah, like sort of literature of ideas and short stories. I feel like that's like a general set of questions like circle a bunch.
Yep. Agreed. Richard?
I love being stuck. When I'm working on a story, I think I become a real prick. For 2 weeks, I dwell, I get moody, I'm ornery. You know what I mean? I'm kind of growling and snarling. And Drew Hayden Taylor says that when he writes, he's under the blanket. When he's in it, he's under the blanket. And I find that with a short story, not only when I'm stuck am I under the blanket, I actually invite others into the blanket with me, and they don't realize it. So I'll give you an example. I was really stuck on a story with one of my main characters, Torchy, and I was at a Nickelback concert. And the front, we were way in the back.
This is the only good thing to come from a Nickelback concert, but
hey, I love their song Never Again. Okay, listen to it. It's incredibly empowering for everybody. Anyway, so nobody was sitting down. I was at Rexall Place with my buddy Junior, and I was not only would thousands of people not sit down in front of us, and Chad said they were going to sing for 3 hours so everyone could sit, but no one was listening. And so I was stuck on this novella, and no one was sitting down. And I said to the gentleman to my left, "Can you believe this? Can you believe this? Chad said that they're going to sing for 3 hours and we could all sit, and these guys aren't sitting. Can you believe this? We're going to have to stand for 3 hours." And in brackets, and I'm stuck on a new short story. And this gentleman to my left looks at me, and I wish maybe he's in the audience, looks at me and he goes, "Well, this is going to be about as much fun as a gut full of pinworms." And I went, "Oh, that's it. That's the line. Oh my." And I don't remember the concert. I remember when they sang Never Again, but I had nothing to write. I mean, it was tattooed on my soul at that part. But that's the alchemy of craft, is that you're so in it. You're spiritually lost. And I feel like as a writer, there's no feeling on earth like being hunted by a story. You're hunting each other. And when it happens, baby, it's like being struck by the sweetest, slowest, most dizzying lightning. And when you're in it, you can actually invite other mammals on this planet into it with you. And they may not realize, but they've actually given you the key to the story. Because once I had, well, this is going to be about as much fun as a gut full of pinworms. Once I had that, I had Torchy, I had the story, and that was the knife wound through the ribs. And then after that, I just remember the next morning waking up, and it was all mine. And I just feel like as a writer, we're standing in a field, dousing ourselves in water, exposing our chests and hearts, saying, strike me again, do that again. I'm here, I'm under the blanket, let's dance. I'm ready, I'm your servant, I'm your disciple, I'm your slave. Let's rock, let's write a short story. I love it.
Okay. Yeah, I think that this is true. That all of us, I know, have felt it, where like you have a problem and then it is solved. And the moment it's solved, you're like, oh my God, that is the only way it could ever have been solved. And now it is absolutely solved, and we don't have this problem anymore. And when I show it to someone, they will see that the problem has been solved. So we're going to go around here. So audience, our esteemed panelists were all asked to, so you can get your pencils ready. Also, it's 40 minutes in. So if you have any questions, please send them into the Q&A and we'll look at a couple. We're going to go around before we hit the Q&A though, and every person on this list has been asked to identify an elder. This would be a short story practitioner who taught them something, that they an example that they have followed, that they treasure, a person who has shown them a way, and then the name of a peer or someone, a younger person maybe earlier in their craft, not necessarily younger, but coming along. So we want to use this platform to pay some tribute to people that preceded us and provide a platform to the people who are out there in our shared practice. So who wants to go first? I want your elder and I want your up and comer. And put your questions in the Q&A. So everyone's got work to do here. Yeah. Anybody?
I'll go.
Thank you.
For my elder, Andre Alexis, who I'm actually working with now. So that's a pretty cool full circle moment. He has a lot of respect for language and simplicity in short stories, which is something I read and we studied in school. And I thought that was like, what magic trick to be able to do that. And also a little bit related to my undergrad studies, a friend that I had, Ryan Kapp, who is currently publishing a lot of short stories at a lot of the journals. I think she reads for the Puritan right now. Don't quote me on that, I could be wrong. But very excellent, has a very good understanding of what a short story does. And I'm excited to see her work out there in the world.
And listeners, we will be posting these. The Giller panel will give you these names. So if you don't, they are coming around. Anybody else? Anybody else want to share their elder and their up and comer? Sharon?
So I have never met her, but I am such a fangirl of the British author Tessa Hadley, who is just the queen to me of short stories. She taught me how to put character on a page and insight and how to do all kinds of funny things with form. And an up and comer, everyone should write down her name, is Jenica Oza, who is a fantastic writer from Toronto. She just won an O. Henry for her story Fish Stories, which was published in the Kenyan Review. And she's got a novel coming out next year, which is just completely brilliant.
The writer who was most important to me, and I did get to know him, was a man named Leonard Michaels, an American writer who meant the world to me. There's a story called Murderers by Leonard Michaels, which I think is a perfect story. He did all sorts of things with form, and in fact, he became kind of a less ornate writer over time. He was doing some pretty wild things with language as a younger writer, and really pared down as he got older. The language was still very rich, like really interesting, but he changed over time. So it's interesting to see somebody change over time and yet remain themselves. So Leonard Michaels, Murderers, and the Nachman stories, you can look those up. And as a younger writer, there was somebody who I taught about a decade ago, a woman named Sayward Goodhand, who's a phenomenal writer and had a really interesting, like a really great collection come out, I think a couple of years ago. So I would really recommend her.
I'll go back to my Lydia Davis shout out. I don't know if you're familiar with Lydia Davis's work. I actually read, she's a translator from French too, and I'd read her translation was like of the first part of In Search of Lost Time of Proust. I like discovered that book through Lydia Davis's translation, which is like somehow just like so clear. Like it's so like I had to look up every third word, and yet it's also like so like so precise. And like, I mean, I don't know if accessible is, I mean, it'd be like a sort of complicated word to apply to that text, but there was something that was just like I don't know, just like so like perfectly lucid and precise and like, and then when I kind of discovered her short stories after, which are incredibly sort of spare, are sort of the opposite of Proust in terms of like range of, vocabulary of diction or something, and found the same sort of precision and care about language in this like very different register. I found that formally really, really compelling. And also, she's somebody who will write stories that are like a paragraph long and that are just sort of like prose poems, or sit on the border between prose poetry and short fiction. And I was like, oh, you can do that? Like that's like, you're allowed to do that. It's like, that's like a short story and you can call it that. And that was really kind of exciting to discover, and not to embarrass him, but David Besmozgis' stories were very meaningful to me when I was first writing short stories. And as a younger writer who I admire a lot, I encourage everybody to check out Bahar Orang's Where Things Touch, which is, again, it's a book that sits on the border between poetry, prose poetry, the essay. I don't know if it's, I'm kind of cheating. It's probably not really, I don't know if Bahar would call it short story collection. It's not really, but it's like, you know, beautiful sort of literature of ideas that has, like, you know, sort of exquisite aesthetic qualities, and is interested in the revolutionary anti-imperialist politics, and that comes through and is in dialogue with lots and lots of like amazing literature in those traditions, in anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist traditions. And yeah, cannot recommend it more highly. Where Things Touch, Bahar Orang.
Sure.
25 years ago, I was sitting in the classroom with the great Keith Millard at UBC, and Keith said something that I find myself saying to a lot of writers. And I need his words sometimes when I'm trying to sell a story or trying to find a place for a story. But Keith said, just as an aside, he said, when you're a writer, you're actually running an airport. And you can have these big 747 jumbo jets that you've been working on for years. You're building them. You've got the instruction manual. You've got mechanics. You've got the team working on it. But from your tower, you notice that there's a little Cessna, little tiny one that's just taking off. And it just wants to fly, and it's ready to fly. And as the operator of your airport, as a professional writer, you've got to let that fly, because sometimes it takes the building of the 747. You think, this is the novel, this is going to get me the GG, this is going to get me the Giller, this is our ticket, we're going to pay off the mortgage early. It's actually, it took that 747, the building of that 747, which may never see the light of day, it took that to find that little 747, and that 747 is the one that will win you international acclaim. You have to respect what wants to take off when it's ready. And sometimes what your publisher wants isn't what is ready in you. And you have to respect that it took that 747, that jumbo jet, and the years that you crafted, it took all of that to create something that you will be remembered for forever. And you need to respect that when it's ready to fly, you gotta let it go. And I think about that all the time.
I agree, but I need your elder and I need your up and comer so that I can go.
Keith Millard as an elder, everything Keith's written. And then of course, I'm always going to go back, because I will never lend anyone this book. Because I just, even looking at it, so this is No One Belongs Here More Than You, stories by Miranda July. I keep it where I can see it, because I want to be that random, that unique, that forever, that special, that bizarre, that beautiful. Thank you.
Okay, so I am going to give a shout out to my dad, because I think I can do that. Give a guy mostly for the sound of cadence. I'm interested in how stories sound. I'm interested in the oral tradition. I'm interested in images rising out of scenes, and I would tell people to go and read the story Vision, which they don't often read. It's not an oft anthologized story by Dad, but it's a very good one. And I'm going to give a call out to Chris Burton, a young New Brunswick writer who has won some prizes and is an excellent practitioner. So our questions are very interesting here. They're actually fascinating questions that we were going to answer anyway. But we're running out of time. So very quickly, many of our audience members are asking questions about literary journals. Can you quickly go around and talk about obviously some of these are aspiring writers, I think that are on our list. They're asking us, can you name a literary journal or a place that you think we've already talked about this, where you think good stories can be found? And if you wanted to join a community of participants, can someone give us, we'll go quick, we'll try to get 2 or 3 in our last couple of minutes. Can someone give us a journal that they like, that you read regularly?
Is my favorite.
Say that again.
The New Quarterly.
Room Magazine.
I read Zoetrope a lot. I don't know if it's does a lot of new writing, but it's a lot of great writing.
Amazing writing. Yep.
I'd say a Protean magazine, which is a magazine out of the States that's got a explicitly socialist politics, which is something that's hard to find in literary presses.
I read everything. I go through any magazines, I go through newspapers. I'm always hunting for the great short stories. So just remember, they say if you want to be a better writer, you have to become a better reader. So read what lights your soul on fire. It may not be on the bestseller list. It may be in old Vice magazines. It may be in the old Globe and Mail. Who knows? But the key is hunt, because if you want it bad enough, it'll start hunting you.
Other interesting questions here are about technology. How is the short story going to do in the podcast world? How does the short story work in internet culture, as we move away from small magazines into primarily interfacing with stories in a digital format? Do any of you have any thoughts on that? Do you think that that the story does well as script, as a podcasted auditory experience? Not everyone has to talk about it, but so I'm just relaying these queries to you. What do you think?
I mean, This American Life, which I listen to, sometimes they do a story, and I think it goes well. I think it's the right length for podcast. I think it does lend itself to that.
The New Yorker does, and is it the New Yorker that has the authors reading, and then they have another one where they have authors pick something from and it does really well because it's so intimate and you can listen to it multiple times. And then I love the conversations, and it's free, and I love the conversations too about. And then the other way that I as an author am engaging with short stories is, for example, George Saunders is doing something called Story Club right now, where he takes apart someone else's story, basically line by line. And it's just, it's exactly what I love. It's that nerding out on, let's dissect the story and see how it's working.
One other very fertile question there is about the non-narrated, about silences in short stories. It's a really good question. We have only a couple minutes left. Do you want to talk about how space works in short stories, like things that are left unsaid that then speak very loudly? I know all of you have done that, where it's the thing that you leave out that is the key piece, and you kind of work in negative space. Does anyone want to talk about non-narrated things in short stories?
I think it's really what makes the difference between a short story and a novel. Just what we were saying earlier about short stories invites you to participate in the narrative. That's actually a perfect way that it does that, right? Like those little spaces, those time jumps, that's the reader's turn to sort of help tell the story and imagine what's happening there. You don't really get that with a novel.
Right.
I think going back to the idea of compression and concision, I think that's the thing. Like you're constantly looking to see, like, how much can I take out of this thing, and for it to still, to cohere and to evoke feeling. Like for me, when I write, the whole point is like, oh, I've got this feeling, and I'm going to create a vehicle to transmit this feeling, and the vehicle is like dramatic, and it's made of language. And how much can I leave out in order to do that? I think the best storytellers, even like people you sit down next to somebody, often, or maybe in certain traditions, the best ones are people who are kind of like cryptic. Right, they'll say something, they'll leave something out, and it's like, and they're just not telling you.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, and then you work for it, and it's satisfying. Oh God, sorry.
Wow, that's a message. Anyway, one more quick one about linked stories. I'm just trying. So many of you have worked on linked stories and about story order. So can we try quickly to say a couple words about that, about linking stories and how you change the mode from one to other, and decisions on ordering? We were briefly talking about this before we went live. So anyone want to talk quickly about link stories?
I think it's really important to wait until your editing process. At least that's what it looked for me. When I'm writing my first few sets of stories, my only goal is to just get the story on the page. My first collection, it became linked like the third draft, not the first few. At first, I was just writing stories. I saw the opportunity, so I linked it together. So I feel like giving yourself to pull away from the story does give you a lot of power.
I love link stories. I loved writing them because often what happens is I'll write a story from one character's point of view. And it's this idea of characters who are seen and characters who are seeing, which is something that Lisa Moore taught me. So I'll write a story from character A's point of view, and character A is seeing character B. And then I'll write a different story from character B's point of view, maybe set in the past, maybe not including character A at all. But I get to explore, what does character B see? How is the world through their eyes? And that I find that so fascinating.
Go ahead, David.
I mean, I've written one collection that is linked like completely, and so it's interesting to be able to. And I don't think you do it in novels so much, unless you do like a series of books, but to return to a character and to see at what point you pick up their story. And again, it's like what I was talking about before with like the episodic nature of short story writing, which is like it's an episode in someone's life, it's a phase of life. And so, you know, picking those moments and returning to a character and seeing how they've changed and picking them up, I find that interesting. I think it's satisfying to readers too. I think a lot of linked story collections have been called novels, and the line is kind of blurred between, well, okay, what makes it a novel and what makes it a story collection.
Agreed.
Is it a link story collection if the links are very loose? So I'm thinking of Eating Habits of the Chronically Lonesome, which was Meg Coles's first collection of short stories, and they're not obviously linked. It's only the close reader who realizes, wait, this character, didn't we? And then, and what? And I love that, about like this idea of all of these stories are existing, even the ones that are not linked, in the same universe.
Yeah, they're not linked causally, they're linked spatially. Yeah, sometimes. Okay, one more super quick one. The weirdest place you've ever done your writing, because some people here are asking about your practice. Are you very disciplined? Are you always doing it in the same place, the same time? Are you extremely disciplined, or are you extremely random? I am extremely random. Lots of stuff happens in airports. Lots of stuff happens on the backs of scraps of paper. Lots of stuff happens at Nickelback concerts. But where, so can you quickly, and then we'll have 1 minute left and call back our Ilana. So disciplined, or if not disciplined, where does this weirdness happen? Richard?
Right here in this beautiful office filled with cool Star Wars stuff. Every morning I'm up at 4 or 5 I got an hour and a half, and I take full responsibility. It's up to me to fill my love cup every morning with writing. And there's nothing like having a great writing day. I can be the best husband, best father, best friend, best son, because I've had that good writing day. And I always have a good writing day, even if it's 20 rock solid minutes or a full hour and 10 minutes or an hour and a half. I'm here every day, AIC, ass in chair, showing up, exposed heart, ready to rock, strike me with the most beautiful lighting. I am here to serve and listen, and the story is the boss.
Taya, I know you're disciplined, it sounds like.
Absolutely not. I'm a mess. Oh my goodness. I write choppily. Like I probably write throughout the day, like every 20 minutes, very messy. The weirdest place, I guess not the weirdest place, but my favorite place. I once locked myself in, well, not locked, but I once went into the beer fridge at work and I wrote for like 20 minutes. That's probably the weirdest place I've written. I write better when I'm not at home.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, that's for me. Sharon?
I used to write really well on airplanes because there's no internet and there's no distraction and there's kind of nothing to do. Yeah, almost missed that.
Daniel, Sarah?
Yeah, I have written kind of wherever and whenever. I mean, sometimes on a given project, I may have a pretty good routine. Like if I'm working on an attempt at a novel or something, it's like I'll do that in a more disciplined way. But if it's not, if the project itself doesn't have its own internal like structure like that, then no. I mean, like just a lot of like sort of, I've been out walking somewhere and I've sat down in a park to write something on my phone. I just feel like that, that feeling of I have to write this down now wherever I am. Like, so, like I'm in the shower and now I'm writing in the bathroom because I'm gonna lose this if I don't write it down in 5
I've
minutes.
done that.
Yeah.
Jumped out of the shower quickly to get like a line down.
Yeah.
David, and then we're done.
Okay, I like quiet. I like to play music, and I'm really slow. So for me, like, it takes hours to like find the right words. So it pretty contained. I wish I have too many things to do. Now my life is busy. I used to be more regular. I'm less regular now. Other things intrude that I can't turn down.
Yep, that's the nature of the beast. Okay, Ilana, will we summon you back?
Hi. So big, huge, enormous thanks to Alexander and everyone on the panel for sharing your time and talent tonight. It was moving and exhilarating and honest, and one of the richest conversations I've had the privilege of listening in on. To all our viewers, I hope you enjoyed hearing from these powerhouse short storytellers. Tonight's panel will be available on our YouTube channel in the coming days, so you can catch it again there or tell your friends about it. Please join us for our next Power Panel on May 3rd, which will examine the process of adapting books to film. If you subscribe to our mailing list, you'll be sent an email to register. If not, please visit our website for more information. Thank you so much and good night.